Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. I do appreciate so very, very much you being with me. You know, our viewership just continues to creep right up a little bit. It's not where I'd like for it to be sure, but nonetheless, hey, help me make it viral, right? Go out there and tell your friends, tell your neighbors. I received so many wonderful comments, both on the public forum there, here on YouTube and Facebook as well, and so many, many private comments that are appreciative of what we're trying to do here on this channel. So again, please help us expand this ministry. We appreciate it so very, very much. Okay, this is summary number 3, day 3 of our summary of our study of Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13. What we have seen thus far is how critical it is to understand that parable of Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13 of the coming of the Son of Man for the wedding in light of the Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Point number 2. Yesterday I shared with you the Old Covenant promises of the coming of the Lord for the wedding and the time of judgment and reward. Isaiah 40, Isaiah 62, which would be at the time in which the Gentiles will be called. Well, let's face it, folks. In the first century, the Gentiles began to be called into the kingdom. And let's face it, John the Baptizer said that the time for the fulfillment of Isaiah 40 and the time for the fulfillment of Isaiah 62 had come. That means that the time for the coming of the Lord for the wedding had come. That's why John said, he, that is Christ, already has his winnowing fork in his hand. The axe is already at the root. And that which does not bear fruit shall be cut down and thrown into the fire. So there's no question whatsoever that from the perspective of John the Baptizer and Jesus, building on the work of John, was applying those Old Covenant prophecies. And remember, it's Old Covenant prophecies concerning the wedding, the remarriage of Israel. It was being applied to the first century. Now what that means is, as we summarized yesterday, that means that if Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13, would be in fulfillment of Isaiah 40, Isaiah 62, and a host of other Old Testament prophecies, obviously. But if Matthew 25, 1 to 13 would be the fulfillment of those Old Testament prophecies, and if it's true that John the Baptizer and Jesus, Matthew chapter 3, Matthew 16, 27, and 28, put the fulfillment of those Old Testament prophecies in the lifetime of the first century generation, then that means that Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13 had to be fulfilled in the first century at the coming of the Lord. And that means the Olivet Discourse cannot be divided into two different subjects unless somebody wants to jump up and say, well, you know, I think the Olivet Discourse is, after all, I think it really is divided, and I think the dividing point is Matthew 25, verse 14 and following. Sorry, that won't work either. And I would say that would be an argumentum ad desperatum, an argument from desperation, of someone seeking to hold on to a traditional view. Well, we see a lot of that kind of desperation. But what I want to do this morning is I want to focus on one particular New Testament passage by way of rehearsal, by way of summary of what we have seen in our study of Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13 as well. Now, this morning's summary is going to be based upon Ephesians 5, 25 and 26, and I'm going to walk on what I'm going to say tomorrow. So tomorrow will be slightly repetitious, but that's okay. In Ephesians 5, 25 and 26, Paul the Apostle said, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church, and he gave himself for her, that he might sanctify, having cleansed her with the washing of water by the word, and that he might present her to himself as a chaste virgin. Now watch. This idea of the presentation of the bride. Notice again what Paul says, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle, but that she should be holy and without blemish. What you have to understand here is that the Sitzenleben, that's a German term that the German scholars use to talk about the real life cultural situation that Paul is writing in, both Jewish and Greek and what have you, is that the presentation of the bride took place at the coming of the bridegroom. That's Matthew 25, 1 to 13. It's at the coming of the Lord. Now look, I have examined well over 55 commentaries. Now I might have missed one, obviously, because that's certainly not all the commentaries on Ephesians that have been written. Every single commentary, without any exception whatsoever, it did not matter if it was amillennial, postmillennial, premillennial, did not matter. Every single one of the commentators agrees that the presentation of the bride to the bridegroom of Matthew 25, 1 to 13, of Ephesians 5, 25 and 26, comes at the coming of the Lord. Now look, in the fellowship in which I was raised, in the churches of Christ, as I've shared with you before, there's some real controversy. Now, I'll guarantee you they don't see the train coming with the difficulties that they're raising for themselves. But in the churches of Christ in which I was raised, there is the view, well, yes, Christ married the church at Pentecost. Well, it kind of raises the issue then, when did Christ present the church to himself? Did he come at Pentecost? Well, they equivocate and they say, well, yeah, he came through sending of the Holy Spirit. Well, I understand what the argument is, but I'm sorry. The coming of the Lord for the wedding is the time of the judgment. Remember? Isaiah 40, Isaiah 62, Hosea. Day of Pentecost was not the day of judgment. So that's not going to work. And then there is the view, hotly debated at times within the churches of Christ, I can tell you this. I have seen men debate this with such fervor that they actually drew lines of fellowship over it, calling one another false teachers and heretics for disagreeing with their respective position. But that second view is that, no, the Lord betrothed the church to himself at Pentecost, but he doesn't remarry the church or marry the church until the end of time. And even some of these individuals, well, they realize they've got a little bit of a problem. And here's why. Because in the book of Revelation, which most of these men apply to the time of the fall of Rome, the destruction of Rome that took place in 476 AD. Okay? So, Babylon is supposedly Rome. Now, some of them say, no. Babylon is the Roman Catholic Church that will be destroyed at the end of time. So there are variations, you see, in these views. So, nonetheless, some of them say, well, yes, Babylon in Revelation was Rome. Well, there's a problem here. The wedding in Revelation chapter 19, 6 to 8, would take place at the destruction of Babylon, i.e. Rome. So let me ask a question. What in the world did the destruction of Rome have to do with the Lord marrying his church? Why was that destruction of Rome necessary for the Lord to marry his church? Because you see, in the book of Revelation, you have the destruction of the old Jerusalem, the city where the Lord was slain, and you have the creation of the new Jerusalem at the coming of the Lord in judgment of Babylon. So again, the question is, what did the destruction of Rome have to do with the marriage of Christ to the church? Oh, and by the way, if you make Babylon in Revelation to be the Roman Catholic Church, and I must say that view is sort of kind of dying out, at least on the public forum. But if you make Babylon to be the Roman Catholic Church that is destroyed at the end of time, then the wedding between Christ and the church doesn't take place until the end of time. Once again, that violates the application of John the Baptizer and Jesus of Isaiah 40, Isaiah 62, Hosea 5, that the wedding was to be in the first century. It just doesn't work. Especially since Jesus in Matthew chapter 22 said, a great king made a great wedding banquet for his son. And he sent out his servants saying, all things are ready. Come to the feast. And with one accord, they began to make excuses and to say, well, I bought some oxen, I got to go try them out. Or I bought a piece of property, I got to go look at it. Or this and that and the other, the wedding, the weather's not good today, whatever. And they killed those servants, mistreated them. And the master of the wedding was angry and sent out his servants, and he killed those wicked men and burned their city. Who do you suppose that's talking about? And what happened upon that destruction? The wedding took place. Jesus, therefore, posited the wedding. Now, the wedding of Matthew 22 is the wedding of Matthew chapter 25. If it's not, what is it? Did Jesus teach a doctrine of two weddings? Argumentum ad desperatum. So again, we have this doctrine of the presentation of the bride to the bridegroom. When would that be? At his coming. When did Jesus put his coming for the wedding? Matthew 16, 27, 28. At his coming. In the first century. Where did Revelation put that coming for the wedding? At the destruction of Babylon. And again, I'm stepping on tomorrow's video, but that's okay. Folks, everywhere we turn, there is a united narrative in regard to the wedding. It is about God's fulfillment of his Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel, to remarry her, and then to invite all nations into this new covenant people. It is a beautiful picture. It is a glorious picture. And if the wedding hasn't taken place, the nations are not yet fully incorporated. Because you see, the 12 tribes had to be restored, and along with the Gentiles, create a new people. And I'm out of time. So I will see you on the flip side. Hey, don't forget, May special. Go to my website, donkpreston.com. Order the brand new book. You'll be glad you did. Okay, see ya on the flip side.